Since your training's completion, you and friend Maxus have continued to improve with weapons training and other aspects of being in the Legion. However, Maxus has not been taking news of the upcoming voyage to Britain as well as you and many of the others. Since Narcissus' speech, Maxus has only been more vocal to you about his fears for what lies ahead. Despite assurances from you that you were both among the most formidable army in the world, his fears linger still on the day you depart. Most of the 8th day is spent loading the ships with supplies, and then slowly, like a long snake, your armada was off. The sight of the Navy among the most awe-inspiring you've seen in your short life. Roughly 300 ships moving your legion, thousands of auxiliary, thousands of animals along the coast. The ships traveling a short distance, then heading west where they faced a strong headwind. Favonius, the deity of the west wind, doing his utmost to push the ships back throughout the early evening, until Jupiter himself threw a flash of light across the sky in the direction of your destination. This was regarded as a favorable omen by all, and further lifted the mood of the men. There was no opposition as your ships landed on shore in the early twilight. Your legion, the first to land, tasked with the business of building the beachhead supply fort. You and Maxus are on trench digging detail along the lengthy exterior wall of the fort. During the initial preparations, the 2nd and 3rd Legions arrive in staggered intervals over the next 7 days. You've had time to slowly acclimate to the new environment, which doesn't look much different than the forested areas in Gallia you had trained at. During the 8th day, your contubernium gets word that Aulus Claudius has ordered the general advance, as the reconnaissance parties he'd sent out have found the way to be clear. Legio Augusta and 2 other legions would be leading the advance. Your legate goes by the name of Vespasian, a family name you hadn't heard before. The men, though, say he is Equites, but comes from an unremarkable family. He's in his early 30s, but had fought as a young man in Thrace, and recently returned to the army a few years ago as legate when Augusta was stationed in Germania. It's clear that the men have a lot of respect for Vespasian, and you can see why. He's been involved with the men doing many of the fortress preparation details and duties that legates normally wouldn't perform. The historian Tacitus had written about the invasion, but unfortunately these years are part of the lost volumes of his history compilation. There's Dio's account, but portions of it still hotly debated. There is evidence that Legio II Augusta was one of the 4 legions that took part in the invasion. The others, speculated to have taken part, are 9 Hispania, 14 Gemina, and Legio 20 Valeria Victrix. The most probable location for their landing in 43 CE, near present-day Richborough Castle in the county of Kent. What's generally accepted is that the Romans landed unopposed, as the Britons had supposedly left the beach area after weeks of waiting with no signs of the Romans. After building the beachhead supply fort, the Romans then marched, it is believed, in 2 paths, one of those along the North Downs towards what future historians would refer to as the Battle of the Medway, one of the most important battles in Britain's long history. All your training to date has prepared you for this day, when you will be marching out to meet the enemy. Other than 2 skirmishes further east of your location, there's been no contact with the Britons. You and the men have yet to see them, but the more experienced of your comrades say to not worry, for the bigger battle still lies ahead. It's been difficult keeping your nerves calmed, but your comrades remind you that the gods themselves favor Rome, and that you will be victorious in the days to come, for the omens have all been favorable. Legate Vespasian is leading your legion, along with his brother, on a march that has taken hours along high ground. You come finally to a stop at a marshy point. The ground here, uneven, and the filth of the swamp has made its way through your caligae and thick woolen socks, and while it feels uncomfortable, due to the events you find yourself in, easily pushed to the back of your mind. The duty of another of the legions will be to slowly mass near the opposite bank of where the main force of Britons is waiting. There, they are to create the illusion of your troops slowly massing at that point. While you and the men here wait to attack, the Batavians you had viewed practicing weeks earlier are to silently cross the river at yet another point and eliminate the chariot horses to prevent them from joining the future battle. This is sure to not only cripple the Britons at a crucial initial stage of the battle, it's likely to infuriate them. You will wait until the Batavians have engaged and then proceed over the marshy area and narrow bend of the river to the solid ground on the other side, where you will meet the enemy head-on. Your centurion Potitus has placed you and your contubernarium along the top edge of the spear that will push into any advancing enemy to preserve the beachhead. Within an hour, you hear the Britons in the distance erupt in fury, which seems to indicate the Batavians were successful, and you are given the command to attack. The Britons, now aware of your presence, are scrambling to turn away from Gemina Legion they had been facing and face you. You remember your training. Hold your ground and advance calmly in the face of even this furious, screaming enemy horde now descending upon you. Much to your surprise, despite their yelling and screaming, the Britons seem unlike many of the descriptions you had painted of them in your mind's eye. Whilst appearing strong and able-bodied, many were your age, and apart from a different manner of dress and weaponry, they didn't look much different than you. But you remember the teachings during your camp well, to not trust those who appear alike, as they harbor their hatred of Rome and the dark gods they worship deep inside, only to bubble over in the chaos of battle. As they close to within 30 feet, you toss your pilum on cue with the others in the front rank and see it sink into a Briton shield where it hangs limp. The Briton, unable to shake your pilum loose mid-stride, drops his shield and continues his charge towards you along with the other Britons. You can barely hear the bark of your centurion, but focus on the training which has been drilled into you daily. You grip your scutum tight to meet the thunderous charge head on. A loud, dull clang as the front line of Britons collides into your scutum wall, and as trained, you jab your gladius forward several times in alternating thrusts with your scutum to expose your enemy. You hear the dull thud of cracking bone as your scutum pushes through into the Briton's right shoulder, startling him momentarily, and this time your gladius thrust sinks into his belly. You withdraw it and immediately thrust again, all the while as you have been trained, twisting the blade slightly as you pull it out. Your first slain enemy soon blurs into half a dozen others as you take turns shifting in and out of the front line. You can barely feel your hands, and your breaths are so heavy it feels that you simply cannot draw in enough air. Gasping, and yet the battle rages for several more hours. But morale is high, as it is obvious from the ground you have taken and the Britons lying dead heaped upon the dead that Rome will be victorious on this day. As night falls, the enemy attacks become sparser and sparser still, and during this pause in the battle, Legion 14 under Hosidius Geta, which had moved to protect your flank, has now moved into the bridgehead to leapfrog you at dawn. Your legion will then be responsible to cover the south and west. With barely time to eat some days-old bread, the Britons attack again at dawn. This time a wall of them that stretches as far as the trees do on either side of you, as like the day prior, you and the other legionaries vigorously thrust your wedge-shaped columns into the closely packed Britons' ranks, carving out deep channels of carnage. For what seems like countless grim hours of endless battle, until Geta himself rallies the men in the north to give a final push. Geta and his legions begin to encircle the Britons, Geta himself narrowly avoiding capture on a few occasions. Another hour passes before the Britons finally become fewer, and the noise lessens, until the only noise is the heavy, fatigued breathing of you and your comrades. Then, the yells of celebration to Jupiter himself as the men finally realizing they had become victor. Many of them falling to their knees in exhaustion, others yelling to the heavens even as they stumble. The Battle of the Medway was fought primarily against the Catavolani tribe that populated the southeast of Britain. After this battle, Aulus Claudius sent word back to Rome for the Emperor Claudius to make his way to Britain. There are just two accounts of Claudius in Britain. The first, written by the Roman historian Suetonius, could be interpreted as dismissive, as it reads, "He fought no battle, nor did he suffer any casualties." The historian Dio elaborates a bit more, but what is sorely missing are the lost Tacitus volumes. Dio writes that Claudius joined his legions at the Thames and led them across the river to engage the Britons who had assembled there. Having defeated them, he took Camalodunum, the Britons' capital. Most historians suggest the act was mostly for show and that Aulus had ensured Claudius's entry to be more ceremonial by nature. Claudius stayed just 16 days in total before he and his large retinue returned slowly to Rome, leaving Aulus to continue advancing the frontier border, which now covered a portion of Britain. During your task to dispatch any Britons still found alive on the battlefield, you and the others receive word from your centurion on the enemy leaders. Caractacus had fled and was heading towards a major river further inland, while his brother Togodumnus had fallen in the battle. Still trembling with adrenaline, you turn to look for Maxus to discuss the battle and subsequent events. You find Maxus lying dead among the fallen. The combination of this discovery and the adrenaline now finally wearing off causes your legs to tremble and you to buckle and fall forward on the soft ground, head down. Unable to control your emotions, the tears stream down your face at the realization that short of Elysium, you will not see Maxus again in this life. Your comrades allow you to wallow for only a second or two before they stand you up and remind you there will be time in the future to mourn. Now is not that time.